Who's going to blink first, Lilith?
That's the question that everyone wants to find an answer for. I think it's the situation has escalated beyond anybody's expectations, and it looks like that there's a realization on both sides, despite the rhetoric, that they have to take measures to de-escalate the situation around Crimea. How would they do it is very difficult, because when you have very strong worded statements being exchanged on both sides, I think in case of Russia, we need some sort of face-saving operation to step back, if that's what their intentions are.
It's interesting because there's a lot of focus on whether there will be an aid package from the IMF and from other sources. And our reporter on the ground in Ukraine, Ryan Chilcote, was making the point earlier that this is still possible, even if there are Russian troops on the ground in areas outside of Russia, because there is some precedent for that. The IMF has gone in and done negotiations in countries where Russian troops have been present. And, of course, Russian troops have been in Crimea for many years. What significance does the position of Russian troops have in all of this?
I think there's a difference between IMF extending financial aid, for example, to Moldova or Georgia, compared to Ukraine. The problem is not just the presence of the Russian troops moving and destabilizing the situation. The problem is that the central government in Kiev could become even more destabilized. IMF needs to know that there is a government in place in Kiev that has control over the country, and they will be able to carry on with the agreements, and it will not collapse, for example, in a few weeks.
And how much is the formation of that government being, how much of the strings being pulled from outside? There was that rather embarrassing leak of a conversation between the US ambassador to the Ukraine and members of the government back in the United States that was leaked on the internet, and that brought to the forefront America's role in shaping the government.
It did give rise to further sort of speculations and conspiracy theories that this has all been engineered from the West. But I think, realistically, despite the talk of Russia or the West shaping Ukraine's future or internal politics, I think ultimately the Ukrainians have their say as well. And we've seen that with the uprising, the people and the parties that were leading the uprising, they ended up in the government. The other issue is that the government claimed to be a unity one, but it is not, and that's another weakness that it has. So what IMF is looking at, whether they are professional enough to negotiate with Russia, de-escalate the situation, get control over the eastern regions of Ukraine, and also manage to include people who are representing their opposition now, become truly a unity government. These are all huge challenges.
So how can you de-escalate tensions, Lilith, without Russia losing face? Because that's what you started with. Russia can't lose face here. So how do you achieve that delicate balancing act?
We really need to find out, first of all, what the Ukrainian parliament was planning to do when it discussed 8 points of the roadmap. It seems like the acting president has decided that it wasn't a good idea to endorse the repealing of the language law, which contributed to escalation of the violence in Crimea.
So removing Russian as an official language was what was voted on a few days ago.
Yes, the parliament wanted to repeal it. The president realized that it is adding to tensions, opening lines of communication, admitting that there have been failures of the opposition leaders and who are now in government, and reaching out to ethnic Russians and Russian speakers.